Uprising, Rights and Responsibilities in the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror was a period of time in the French Revolution in which France's revolutionary leader executed anyone suspected of being against the revolution and irresponsibly used the fear which came from this to control France. Even though the Reign of Terror was a terrible event, it helped set in motion positive changes in human rights and political ideologies.
In the late 1700s, France was in a state of economic decline due to the military aid and forces supplied to America during the American Revolution, as well as the construction of the luxurious Versailles Palace. With inflation increasing the prices of food, bread became an important staple food for its stability and accessibility. However, as the French began to rely on it, a flash freeze came upon them, adding to their problems. This killed off many crops, leading to starvation and hypothermia for many. Many of the French now couldn't afford what scarce bread remained, as now it cost too much. So the French monarchy quickly realized they needed to do something and made a law enforcing a max bread price, and raised the taxes greatly so they could pay the bakers to keep them in business. The increased tax meant that now, even with the price cap, people still couldn't afford the bread, and started demanding the king lower the taxes. So the colonists planned to call together the General Estates, a gathering of the three estates, commoners, nobility, and clergy, that was last called over 2 centuries ago. King Louis gave his permission for it to continue, although since the nobility and clergy always voted the same in the past, the commoners wouldn't be able to make drastic changes. The commoners found this unfair, requesting to have double votes since there were over twice as many commoners as the clergy and nobility. But after much hearing from the commoners, King Louis XVI gave the commoners double representatives, but never answered the question for the second vote, along with placing part of the army in the city to try to prevent unruly citizens.
Due to the looming army, tensions began to rise to a new level. When the tension and spite were at their peak, a man jumped up on a water barrel and spontaneously delivered a rousing speech. This caused the commoners to form a mob and raid the armory for weapons. With their weapons, they required gunpowder, so they looked to the Bastille, which contained 250 barrels of gunpowder and was a symbol of the nobility. The newfound militia demanded that the Bastille surrender, but they denied it, leading the rebels to enact a siege. After a couple days, people coming back from another attempt at an agreement cut down the bridge ropes, accidentally killing 2 people below. The people outside misheard a guard warning them to stay away as them telling them to come in. Soon, a nervous guard misfired, causing the people to panic and believe it was a trap. The citizens fought back and eventually won, brutally executing the governor of the prison along with many guards. This marked the beginning of many mobs, massacres, and marches. After the insurrection of August, also known as the storming of the Tuileries, on August 10, 1792, in which the citizens of France marched on the Tuileries Palace, King Louis XVI was captured and held in the Temple, an old castle. He was imprisoned there in September, where after 2 trials, he was found guilty of high treason against France and executed on January 21, 1793.
After the execution of King Louis XVI and the abolishment of the monarchy, the French people needed a new government, so they came up with the National Convention, where people elected by the people would gather and discuss topics like the rights of the people. The National Convention then also instated the Committee of Public Safety, whose responsibility was to keep the people safe. From the National Convention came 2 main political groups, the Jacobins and the Girondins. The Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre, believed in a more radical approach to the government, believing that they needed a completely new system where the legislation led, and that they must remove anyone who barred their way of progress. Meanwhile, the Girondins believed in a system where all citizens were given the right to vote, similar to a democracy. The Jacobins, who believed it was best for Paris was best for the country, called the Girondins traitors for this, as it would also put power in the hands of the rural regions. Meanwhile, the Committee of Public Safety had already begun executing the reigning royal family members. The guillotine could never be sated, so the executions continued, eventually turning to the leaders of the Girondins because of the claims from the Jacobins. With the Girondins out of the way, Maximilien Robespierre stepped up and started using the fear from the executions to help control France. First, Maximilien Robespierre started executing some of the potential competitors. First was Jacques Hébert, who was an extreme radicalist and was blamed along with some of his followers for partaking in a foreign plot. Next up was Georges Danton, who was attempting to stop the terror, and Camille Desmoulins, who attacked Robespierre through his newspaper. As the terror wore on, people began to revoke the church and ransacked many of them, either raising them or forcing them into atheism. This bothered Robespierre, not because he was Christian, but because he thought people needed something to believe in. And quoting Voltaire, "If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him." He invited all the people in Paris to come to the Festival of Supreme Being. There, he announced his cult, and that it would be based around him, causing whispers about how the man isn't satisfied with being master. He has to be God. On June 10th, 1794, the terror reached its peak. With the prisons full, executions sped up, and the rights to a fair trial and judge were thrown out the window to speed up the executions.
This led to a period called the Great Terror, and made people question the necessity of all the chaos in the first place. With France winning the war against Austria and Persia, who both invaded France during the Revolution, and France's situation stabilizing, it was unnecessary to keep executing this much. Despite this, Robespierre continued, claiming that the true conspirators were amongst the convention, also declaring that he had a list with their names on it. After declaring this, he went into hiding temporarily. This was a big mistake. Now with tensions in the convention at a new high, with the executions of political figures, Robespierre's cult, desecration of the people's rights, and the new list of names, they began to plot against him to execute him before he executed them. Robespierre arrived to deliver a speech, but was cut short by another member who demanded his arrest for lacking in his responsibilities. Robespierre, speechless, said nothing as other members shouted their agreement, demanding that he and his largest supporters be executed. When word of this got around, Henriette, one of the members supporting Robespierre, ordered the prison not to take them. This led to Robespierre and the others being left free to hide in a hotel, while they promised there would be an uprising. Ironically, no such uprising came, since Robespierre had irresponsibly executed many of the people who would have supported him. When they realized this, they panicked, and when the convention along with a small militia arrived at the hotel, the meeting being held by the Robespierrists erupted into chaos. Robespierre attempted to commit suicide with a gun in the midst of it all, but mishandled the gun and shot his jaw. Later, on the 28th of June, when he was eventually executed, the crowd clapped for an entire 15 minutes.
Near what would become the end of the revolution on October 9th, 1799, Napoleon returned from a successful Egyptian campaign in which the Sphinx most likely lost its nose. As he states upon his return, "I found the crown of France in the gutter and picked it up." And he took control of the governmental situation through the 19th Brumaire coup that ended with the abolishing of the National Convention. This led to what is now known as the Napoleonic era, in which France was led to conquer most of continental Europe. This short-lived time of prosperity came with many changes, including the rise of middle class and the growth of nationalism.
During the Reign of Terror and French Revolution, many people disagreed with how the government was being run, which led to many people theorizing their own versions of how they think it should be run. At the time, the dominant social structure was feudalism, but the new ideas gave birth to others, such as nationalism, liberalism, and socialism. These ideas were propelled by Napoleon's army throughout Europe, and in many countries replaced feudalism. These ideas also started more that would eventually grow into more modern forms. From the revolution also came the guillotine, replacing the more brutal methods of punishment such as torture, with something more efficient and painless.
The French Revolution overall brought new political and governmental ideas to Europe, as well as technological advancements such as the guillotine, which gave a quick and painless death, changing what is considered to be a leader's responsibilities and people's rights, and finally, helping to redirect the path of France as a country.